Hello, everybody. This is Peter. Welcome to the March 24th weekly radio address. Hope everyone out there is doing well. I'm feeling more recovered than I was last week. I know I sounded rather tired, but everything is falling back into place, and hopefully after this program is finished, we will continue to move forward with a lot of developing projects that have been on the back burner since Zeitgeist Day was deemed a central focus. We have 4 dominant meetings that occur very frequently in TeamSpeak as of now. The communications team, which I'm going to begin helping out with more so, is, of course, an expansive team which consists of many different attributes, including the lecture circuit team, which I want to begin work with different people, and it's going to be a very personal interaction, obviously, to gauge how aware people are so they can participate in this lecture circuit concept, which we do need very much. We can't just have a few people running around. We need more faces for the movement, more diversity. So there's probably going to be some type of test or something that will be created, some type of, maybe even a seminar of such. Jacques and Roxanne have been talking about making a seminar for the concepts of resource-based economy, from step A to step Z, covering everything from the technological attributes to be aware of to the sociological attributes that most people think would be problematic, given the traditionalized notions that are put forward as far as our open quote human nature is concerned. I'm sure many of you are tired of hearing about that subject, as I've belabored that numerous accounts, but nevertheless, these are important topics that need to be addressed for anyone that wants to actually go out and represent the movement. Let me keep going here through my list, though. But the communication team, we're going to start doing more with, and there should be weekly or bi-weekly meetings for the team as a whole, and there will be specific people designated for certain attributes of it. Within that, there is, that's it for now as far as that. The developers team is a big one, and that's a very important one as of now because there's so much back-end work that needs to be done. An email was sent out calling for help in development, programming, database creation, etc. We have a lot of new websites that we want to create and interlink. We're going to be doing a lot of renovation over the course of the next few months as well. And the developers team comes into play. The developers team currently meets, I think, about every week. We're going to have a calendar posted on the main site. There is a calendar already, but I'm going to move it to the front page to show everyone what's actually happening in the communal environment as people get together to talk about specific issues. So keep an eye out for that. I think if you have interest in helping with new creations, for example, we're going to do a Zeitgeist University network. That's going to be another website created. As most of you may know, in America, the source of most activism has come from schools, historically speaking. So we want to keep that pattern going and try to get an activist circuit, an awareness circuit happening, whatever you want to call it, in the major universities throughout the world, of course, not only limited to America. So that's something that's on the back burner. Simultaneously, we have the Zeitgeist Media Project. You guys have been listening to me complain about the slow attributes of that for a while, and we're finally getting that back in focus. There's some very excited developers that are happy to help with that. I recently put a graphic up on the homepage for, I believe it's DeviantArt, where a section was made for the Zeitgeist movement. And really brilliant, beautiful art. Art has a very powerful place in all what we're doing in regards to communication. So I'm really hoping the Zeitgeist Media Project will be underway fairly soon. We're going to do a chapter site for the international domestic chapters, well, domestic being U.S. It's kind of arbitrary to say that considering I'm in the U.S. And there's so many other places on the planet. But since I am here, the U.S. is a particular focus, and we're trying to get all the states taken care of. There are periodic chapter meetings that happen every week or 2 weeks or so. In fact, there is an international chapter meeting today at 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. I will be popping in for that as well. So it's really important that the chapter organizers in each community, in each one of your countries or cities, begin to really take the reins as far as communication in your region. And I'll be talking more about that in general, especially in the chapters meeting. We also want to develop a database. We have a database of skills in the movement already. It's built into our Joomla profiles that are on the website, but they're not really recognized. So there's a push now to create a more thorough skill set database. The media project will work like this in part, but I think a dedicated site might actually be helpful as far as that. And, of course, there's From Earth to Venus, which is the largest developers program, software-based development, that we have come up with thus far. I won't belabor what that's about because I think I've already expressed it numerous times. But it is to create a virtual infrastructure for the planet for a new social design, the resource-based economy. And I'm also mulling the idea of a Z-Bank. This has been on the back burner for a while. A Z-Bank would be another name for a time bank. What better way to slow this system down than to stop the circulation of money and to try and encourage people into a bartering system for services. It's difficult because there's so many caveats and holes that could be problematic. The legality is questionable in the United States to a certain degree, but I'm just wanted to throw that out there because I thought it was an interesting idea. And it is happening across the world. I have some friends that work at the New York Time Bank, and I've been looking into that. But going back to the teams issues, so communications team, developers team meetings, international meetings, U.S. domestic meetings. These meetings are going to become pivotally important and become highly publicized, whether they're open to everyone, meaning everyone can contribute, or they're open for listening and they're closed only to participants. That's to be seen. But that's going to be a strong focus to have periodic meetings that will be publicized so people can understand exactly what we're doing with transparency. As a lot of you know, the states, U.S. chapter states, which are hosted on our server, went down because of some updates that were occurring, and they went down twice, actually. They should mostly be up by now. If they're not up, then they should be up very soon. I want to encourage anyone out there that has a strong interest to really make novel websites as opposed to the template-based websites we're using. If you want to have a great deal of freedom, you might want to go ahead and get your own server to host your website. Obviously, web hosting is pretty cheap as long as you're not getting tons of traffic and you don't have a lot of heavy things on it. So I want to throw that out there to anybody that's had their site go down. If you want to move that information to another site, it shouldn't take you very long to do so. You could even utilize the same template. In other words, this would avoid the technical problems that might emerge with people simultaneously updating their sites. Installing programs that might have conflicts. There's always holes with stuff like that, and unfortunately that's fallen through a few times the past week. Let me see, what else is there? The New York Zeitgeist Day edit, I'm still trying to punch that out. It's a great deal of footage, and there were some audio problems, of course, that emerged. There was a great deal of incompetency in the space itself with the technicians that were there that didn't understand what was supposed to happen. And it's always a problem when you have short time frame to do anything. So I'm trying to get that together for everybody fairly soon. And I think that's just about it for general announcements. I just want to point out that the focus is going to move to these team organizations. One thing I am going to say, inside, my time is getting very, very problematic, and because I want to start to engage more people directly rather than sit here and just talk out to you as I do with all of these questions, most likely this is going to be the last radio show for a little while until I get myself in order. I'm going to basically use this time to put the knowledge database together. The knowledge database together is very important. It takes all of the questions that have been asked of me and the movement over the course of the past year. I've mentioned this before, but only I, unfortunately, can do it because I'm the one that answers the question, jumbling my speech, and I'd like to be able to go through and proof very slowly and very specifically all of my statements to make sure that they are supportable and make sure that there's any foundational information and sources are available as well. So that's going to be very big. I think I've done a pretty decent job over the course of the past year at answering these questions, and many of them have been repeating themselves over and over and over and over again, which is fine because they come at it from different angles. But I think it's time that I finally bite the bullet and get this knowledge database together. Then there will be a point of reference, and then I'm going to come back and do the show after that is done. Plus, I have 6 months to go before my intended release of Zeitgeist Moving Forward, which has already been word of mouth essentially accepted in California at a film festival. I'm hoping to get this done. The problem is it really is a large project, and I'm not even a tenth of the way through in pre-production because I've been so busy. So that's another reason why I'm going to have to stop doing this weekly radio show for a little while until I get things back in order. But I think the radio show has proven to do a decent job of addressing points and keeping people focused. And again, I'm going to come back and do it, but I just need to take time and focus on all these other things that I just simply haven't had time to do. And as I mentioned, my more specific focus is going to be within the teams and getting all the teams together and all the chapters really on pace to doing well and getting this site together. Anyway, I'll stop repeating myself, and I'm going to jump right into your questions. Number one, Are you familiar with the triangle of expectations? At one point of the triangle is open quote cheap, and another is open quote fast, and another is open quote good, close quote. In a market economy, you can only ever have two of the three. Well, in terms of solving the economic crisis, good and fast are now the only options, and they seem exceedingly unaffordable. I worry that if environmental movements such as the Green Party continue to focus on how to afford necessary changes, those changes won't get made, even if the Green Party was elected with majorities in every country in the world tomorrow. Well, the Green Party doesn't focus on the market system, therefore they're not focusing on the actual problem. As far as the notion of cheap, fast, and good, sure. I mean, fast and good more specifically. Fast is a tough one, considering all the barriers we have financially. And you're right. I don't know if we can afford anything. So the question is, what is the best way to go about things? I think ultimately you're going to come into a scenario, I think, because of the excessive amount of debt that has accrued, the only route is essentially to mobilize resources as opposed to money. And that, of course, that is a quantum leap from where we are today. I really don't know how to describe the way things will unfold because there are so many parameters. But I think I answered your question. I don't want to belabor any one question too much. And I think there was another question here that picked up where you kind of left off. Number 2, I posed a question about the collapse of society a while back, and I was wondering how I can prove this to be true to people. I want undeniable, incontrovertible proof and facts which prove that this collapse is going to happen. I want to help these people before it's too late, and they have to learn the hard way. True. Of course, many people will not be awakened until biosocial pressures take place, but I'm hoping I can convince at least some people beforehand. What tools can I use to help me with this? Good question. Well, none of us are prophets, but all we can do is follow the environmental and economic trends that have been set in motion and that have been alluding to some very serious destruction. We know peak oil is here. We know that we have energy crises that are on the table that because of the demand being destroyed by the last oil peak, meaning countries, it's not that oil went back to its original price because somehow there was more oil. And there's a manipulation aspect to it, too, which I don't put past any of these individuals. But what did happen is demand was destroyed in certain countries where it was peaked to such an extent that the idea of using oil at all suddenly became not an option. And that the destruction of demand is very pivotal in the way the United States financial circuits are dealing with the oil issue that we see today. And it's going to happen again. You're going to see another peak, and it's going to destroy even more demand. And statistically, it's going to look like things are leveling out. No, what it means is that there's people that simply can't afford oil at all anymore, and the repercussions of those initial peaks are setting forth that issue, setting forth that reality that they can't get anything. And you see this in a lot of countries right now. You see basically just society being slowed down to compensate for the oil price, which gives the illusion that oil is not scarce and that it's just a up and down supply and demand type of thing. I hope that makes sense the way I'm explaining it. But let me quickly say that there's $22 trillion of a $22 trillion financial allocation needs to be made across the world to build an infrastructure, according to the International Energy Agency, an infrastructure to allow for renewable energies to come into place. In my lecture in New York called Social Pathology, I detailed this very specifically, stating that how can we expect the world, which is in debt to itself, the United States government, which is in tremendous amount of debt, it's not going to be able to afford its interest very soon. While we have the collapse of Greece, the collapse of Iceland, and the impending collapses of many other countries, smaller countries, of course, initially, and then it's going to, we're going to see more cycles of bust happening in America. It's not over. It's far from over. There's no way. There's far too many bubbles out there, debt bubbles that are currently there, that have to blow up before things get better. When you look at this, systemic global defaults that are beginning to emerge. You can begin to see that the only way out is basically a complete capitulation of defaults and bankruptcy. That's the way I see it happening. There's no way for this to resolve except for if the game is to continue. the game has to be played out. I mean, you could stop the game. We could stop the game right now, and then we could start from scratch. But the financial game is set in motion, and they want to perpetuate it, and they'll keep manipulating it to the, quote, elite's advantage as much as they possibly can. A few small countries fail doesn't mean much to the financial oligarchs that really run things, as we all know. So, point being, there's not going to be any money to change anything. People say, well, how are we going to build one of Fresco's cities? There's probably not going to be enough money to build one of Fresco's cities in its full form. There's not going to be enough money, I think, to change the rotting, rusting infrastructure that is already in existence for our current energy establishment. So there's the issue. There's the clash. You have true resource scarcity, including water, including even air in some elements, some areas like Egypt. You have true resource scarcity emerging in a time where there is a monetary paradigm has unfolded where there's so much money out in existence, there's so much outstanding debt, in other words, that it's like a black hole, it's like a vacuum, and the game has set this up. I mean, how can you possibly bail out the entire world? There isn't enough money to do so, and then get us on pace again so we can spend money into things that actually matter. We've dug the most gigantic hole with the derivatives markets, the bubbles, the private and consumer debt is still astronomical, and there's no way to reconcile any of this changing within the next 10, 20 years. I can't possibly see how this is just going to blow over. So, if you just simply look at those two attributes, and I don't have all of the statistics in front of me as far as the level of debts that are occurring in the third world and all the other countries, those countries that are on the edge of bankruptcy, such as the United States. I mean, I hope everyone realizes once the United States is considered bankrupt, what that's actually going to mean psychologically to the rest of the world. But I won't belabor that. So the difference now between what used to happen with these boom and bust cycles, which some of them have been really bad, such as the Great Depression, which was, capitalized on in some manipulation, but it did come out of the roaring 20s credit expansion, essentially. What you have now is something different. You have a resource problem coupled with a monetary problem, and there's no way to find a mutual relationship between the two if you want to continue playing the economic game. That is why the society is going to collapse and going to continue to collapse. As long as the financial game is in order, you can expect things to continue to break down because that's the paradigm that we've created. So anyway, I hope that helps. Go to the societal breakdown section of the Zeitgeist Movement forum, and you'll see some very diligent posts of the vast amount of resource, environmental, ecological, government, political problems that are beginning to emerge across the world. We know today that there's more exploitation than ever before. There's more slavery than ever before. So, back to your question, actually, how do you help people? Well, you do what you can in your own personal circle as far as I'm concerned. Do I donate to charities and things like that? Yes, I do, but I know that it doesn't really do anything. I know that there's so many third parties taking the skim off the top when you give anything to any charity that by the time it actually makes it to any country, it's a fraction of what it should have been, but that's the nature of the monetary system. I can't give you advice on that regard. You just have to take care of your circle, as biased as that is, but at the same time, you have to work towards the greater goal. And yes, we have to succumb to some form of larger order collapse before the public chooses to wake up, and I won't belabor that anymore. Number 3, hello, Peter. I think we cannot deny the fact that the capitalist system brought us to this day of modern technology. Okay, let me stop you right there. There's a common excuse that the capitalist structure is what has produced the modern world that we see today. If you go back statistically and look at the financial up and downs, which I think is the lifeblood of the capitalist system, you'll find that technological invention has not been correlated to money coming in and out of the system. While obviously there's an incentive to create, if you look at the history of technological development, it's exponential information technology development, you'll find that it's almost irrespective of the booms and busts. It's almost irrespective of country. It has very little to do with the system of exchange under the capitalist system. So I want to just correct that a little bit. There is a correlation, but it's very weak. It's just assumed, since the system's been in place, that the progress that we've seen is because of that. Frankly, I think if the capitalist system hadn't been in existence, not to say I know what would have been during this evolution, invention could be so much greater today. It could easily have been, we could be 300, 400 years advanced by this point if we weren't hindered by the planned obsolescence and all the attributes that are built into maintaining the establishment, the inherent inferiority of producing goods and services, because in order to compete in society, you have to produce, quote, the best at the lowest possible cost, which is impossible. So you can't make the best. It's impossible. If you did make the best, you couldn't sell it because someone else would undercut you and make slightly less of the best, which is what they do. And then they would sell that because the public, of course, has to succumb to what they can afford as well. So it's a self-feeding inferiority loop as far as what's produced. But when they continue, she continues, however, would you agree with me that progress is only true to a certain extent in capitalism? Yes, I would. Example, just as Snow Leopard and Windows 7 compete for market share, they keep bringing new ideas, but with regard to the altruistic part of the society like medical care, progress is utterly paralyzed. True. My second question is, aside from Jacques' book, The Best That Money Can't Buy, what other reading materials would you suggest in subjects like human behavior, true incentive, and court psychology? Well, I don't have the list in front of me. I do strongly recommend looking at the reading list that the Venus Project has put forward. It's actually on our main site, on the left-hand side. The work of B.F. Skinner is a great primer when it comes to investigations of human behavior and the science relationship of it, behaviorism, as it would traditionally have been called. As far as incentive, there's a recent book put out, I believe his name is Daniel Pink, and he did a very interesting analysis of what it means to have this carrot and stick approach to incentive as opposed to giving people freedom to do what they like. And when it comes to mechanical things that could be easily automated, yes, there is an incentive basis towards people getting paid more money. They will work faster, but it's a mundane form of occupation. They don't think faster, they just work faster in a mechanical sense. However, when it comes to invention, it's been found that the carrot and stick approach, meaning the financial reward approach, is actually detrimental. It's some very pivotal research. So if you're in an inventive environment where you want to create solutions, to have the financial incentive evidently, and which I think there's a lot to support that for many reasons, is in fact a detriment, which I think is fascinating. As far as court psychology, there was an individual I quoted a few times in my lecture in New York regarding a 25-year veteran court psychiatrist, actually, who dealt with violent criminals his entire life. Unfortunately, his name is leaving me right now. He wrote a book called Violence. If you go online and type in violence, or if you go to whatever, Amazon, type in violence. James Gilligan. James Gilligan is brilliant for his analysis of the court system and court psychology, specifically when it comes to violence. So hopefully that helps. I recommend all those books: B.F. Skinner, Daniel Pink, and James Gilligan. But please check the list we have as well. It's a great list that Jacques and Roxanne compiled. Number 4, are the number of members shown on the main site include the members of each chapter? Is the main site integrated with the other chapters? If not, the numbers of the members is potentially larger, since members subscribing to local chapters are not subscribed to the global as well. Good point. We've encouraged those that subscribe to local chapters to, of course, sign up for the main site as well. It would be great to have a universal database, and there are people working on that now. Perhaps that can be established. But in fact, I'm hoping that most people that sign up for the individual chapters sign up for the main site. That would seem pretty obvious. In fact, I'm going to make a note that maybe those other chapters should make a post on their own websites to say it's a good idea for others to join the global site as well. So let me make a note on that. That's probably a good idea, just so the numbers are represented. Even if some people don't speak English, which most of our newsletters go out in English, it still would be beneficial for us. So thank you. I'll see what we can do about that. Number 5, what are your thoughts about philosophy? What kind of philosophy do you think is relevant? What is not relevant? Is ancient philosophy from Greece, Socrates, Plato, relevant today? Thank you for taking the time. Okay, philosophy. Philosophical notions, to me, can only be evaluated on a per-case basis. I don't really regard overarching generalizations or schools of philosophy, Greek philosophy as a general overarching distinction. Granted, there are certain interconnected dispositions because they come from the same period and similar cultures, but I take it on a per-case basis. Philosophy is really just information, But philosophy the reason I've put down philosophy in general, again, it's a very strong generalization. I'm not against philosophy. I think philosophy simply has a propensity to get very floaty and very detached from anything that's real. I think a true philosophy needs a physical referent. It needs to have something related to something tangible, and not just a mental exercise for all intents and purposes, in creative speculation on different nuances of the human condition in life. That's fine. It becomes poetry in a sense. But unless it comes down to a physical referent, I'm usually not very interested in philosophy, but that's just me. George Carlin once made a great quote. He said, some people consider things that are and ask why. Some people consider things that are not and ask why not. And some people have to go to work and don't have time for all of that shit. And I think that's a very distinctive point to state, because there's a verbal hobby that's associated with philosophical dispositions. I don't have to belabor that. I think everyone can relate to that kind of whimsical notion. I've always loved reading philosophy that's related to science. Scientific philosophy is very, very important if you were to give that type of distinction. Again, it's an overarching notion, but I take it on a per-case basis. I don't think about things as philosophy. I just read them as information and see what correlates and what doesn't. Number 6. You've said before that we have the technology to create electric cars which outperform old-fashioned gasoline cars. Given the current state of technology, is it technically, physically possible that in today's society, even the heaviest road vehicles such as tractor-trailers, buses, bulldozers, and all of the other construction equipment could be fully electrified and perform just as well, if not better, than their gasoline counterparts? There's no reason why that can't be possible. And I guarantee you the U.S. military probably already has tanks that run on concentrated batteries that come from solar generation. It's really just a matter of how small we can get the technology and how potent the potential is. That's all. I have absolutely very little concern that we could power if you can power a train with electricity on tracks, as primitive as that is in general, then it really is just a matter of figuring out the technology to apply it in singular instances, as industrial as they may seem. I don't see any reason why you couldn't fly a plane with this type of technology if you just were able to encapsulate it into a condensed form. It would probably become in the form of hydrogen or something at that level as far as the transfer of electricity. But I won't go into all of that. But no, I don't see any evidence to show, especially with Moore's law and everything else, that these things would not be possible. It's really just a matter of degree. You have a second question here. Could today's racing sports cars, which use large engines, need immense horsepower, also be electrified and perform? I see why. I don't see any difference between that question and the prior question. And the third part of the question, hypothetically, let's say that in our current system, some person or a group of politicians, city planners wanted to build a new city somewhere. Let's also say that they wanted the city to use Jacques Fresco's circular city design for the city. Would that be possible? Well, Jacques has been advocating his city systems. If I remember correctly, actually, he'd been attempting to sell his city systems holistically. That's what they were. They were designed as really simplistic city systems. Well, not simplistic, but, actually they are very simplistic, extremely practical, very high-tech. But they're integrated city systems, and yes, I think in his vision, maybe he can correct me if I'm wrong, but when I first met them, I found it fascinating that this is what he was pursuing. Instead of making a car and distributing the car, he wanted to distribute entire city systems, which I think is extremely ambitious, and it's unfortunate that no one would. The odds of someone actually purchasing something like that are very slim. But to answer your question, I don't see any reason why not. That's essentially what his intent has been in the commercial industry, to try to get some type of sustainability in the system, to have people actually purchase his entire city, self-contained city structures. So, where am I? Number 7. Do you think religion and all it entails, superstition, irrationality, faith, will phase out naturally over time as society evolves and heads towards a resource-based economy? Yes, I would have to say so, because the pattern has already been set up. I mean, we've probably come from a world, before the Enlightenment, almost everyone had a religious annotation if you look back historically. There were very few, to be atheist was dangerous back, many, many centuries ago. I think the pattern is, there is, Islam is very restricted from the world as we see it today. It's growing very, very rapidly. there's still a lot of closed governments out there that restrict information to such a degree where people don't get the information needed to overcome these forms of superstition. But generally speaking, less people on the planet believe these things than they used to per capita. So I would say that that it's phasing out. The application, the more problems arise, there's always this phenomenon that happens where people that are, say someone loses their job, they're destitute, there's a propensity for them to do one of two things. Either they move closer to religion, or they move into an anti-type of religious thing where they finally have understood that their ideals of relating to some omnipotent figure that will guide their life isn't real. So I think the latter is holding more strongly these days. I mean, people, if someone's faced with not having food, are they going to choose their Bible over food? The biosocial pressure, I think, is there as the system begins to break down. Not to mention scientific inquiry is beginning to explain many things that were so mysterious that they could only blame on God. Religion was a form of ascribing meaning to actions in reality that no one had a causal relationship about. So they invented gods to explain them. And that, of course, is being challenged. Science is doing a very good job of explaining so much that was considered mysterious and outlandish, historically speaking. So yes, in a short answer, I think yes. It might take quite a while, but I don't see religion maintaining its strength as the centuries continue. Everything is against it in that regard. And I mean religion in the most deep the most deep theistic sense, not in the sense of just general philosophy. Those things will always persist in a general way. But when it comes to these specific superstitious beliefs and blind faiths, I think that people will eventually outgrow those things, just like as a child outgrows Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. Number 8. Hi, Peter. I was pleased to meet you in New York. Can you discuss the threat that fanatics and deranged supporters may pose to you personally and the movement in general? In New York, I saw you basically stalked and harassed by a fan who probably meant no harm, but who was extremely disruptive and basically derailed any attempts to discuss real issues facing the movement. That's odd. I don't remember that person, but let me continue. Even beyond these disruptions, the threat of violent acts being committed by members could potentially tarnish the movement, despite the fact that we preach nonviolence. I am afraid that some of the recent dissenters do not understand the potential seriousness of these threats. I used to be sympathetic to their cause, but am no longer due to what I myself have witnessed. I'm not quite sure what you've witnessed. I have yet to come into I've had my run-ins with various people that are very much against what we're doing, but when it comes to members, as you denote, people that actually are participating, supporters, there's always going to be some people that don't quite understand it. There's always going to be some people that get the wrong impression, that misinterpret things. And, that's why we're doing the radio show, and that's why these events exist as they do. As far as dealing with these problems, we just have to continue to educate. Again, as I've said before, there are always going to be, not always, hopefully, but at this stage, there's definitely going to be a large amount of confused and aberrated individuals that don't understand, don't want to understand, and project into it all of these negative notions that have been conditioned into them. Those that call us New World Order, those that call us communistic, those that call us anything that doesn't actually take into account the information that we talk about. They're projecting into it, and it is very dangerous. I wouldn't consider those that do that to be supporters, though, as you denote. But anyway, that's about all I can really say on that. Again, the whole thing is contingent upon social therapy, and we're doing the best we can. Number 9. Dear Peter, I'd be interested to hear any ideas that you have that have been discussed regarding the disposal of the debris that will become, of our current cities after we've demolished them. I know it's not going to be a relevant issue for a while, but I'm stumped and the curiosity is killing me. Jacques has stated very, very simply that we would mine the existing cities for whatever resources we can pull out of it. If we're in an age of nanotechnology disassemblers, well, life could be very, very easy. We could break the cities into component attributes, put them into chambers, and we could run nanodisassemblers to break them down molecularly, and then we could recycle those molecules. That's, of course, very, very far in the future, but the science is there. Basically, you take something like New York City, you move everybody out, and you basically start to pull any raw materials you can out of the slow demolition of the entire structures, of all the structures, and recycle them as best you can. I mean, there are probably certain things that can be built upon. The problem is everything is still so primitive that there's very little to salvage. I mean, concrete, these are things that might be able to be, well, I'm not sure if concrete can be really recycled in any specific fashion. I'm sure there's some way to break it back down. But nevertheless, I'm not going to speculate on it because I'm not really sure how that would work. But what I would say is that we get whatever we can out of the cities. There's plenty of materials that have been utilized. We use whatever existing infrastructure, canals and holes that are there. But I have a feeling that given the advanced state of materials, new metamaterials, materials that are not used whatsoever, if you look at what's available versus what we're doing, New York City basically is slowly sinking into itself because every time there's a problem with the street, they don't actually go to the root problem where the weakness of the ground, because first of all they can't stop traffic long enough to do it. They can't move people out. New York is in horrible shape as far as I'm concerned. The dilapidated attributes are I'm not going to belabor it. The dilapidated attributes of most modern cities are not even worth salvaging in any real form. So you just need to start from scratch. I'm going to keep going. Number 10. Hey, Peter, how do we know we are ready technologically for a resource-based economy? I haven't seen any hard evidence of it yet, and I would have thought that would be one of the first things to go up on the Venus Project website. I understand all the behavioral, societal changes we need and values, etc., and completely agree, but I haven't seen any proof that a resource-based economy is technically possible. I'm not quite sure what you're looking for. This question has been asked to me many times. A resource-based economy is taking known information and giving them a social imperative and updating society based on that knowledge. In other words, we understand molecular engineering and what it can do for us. We understand advanced forms of memory metals. We understand that we have tons of energy. We understand the state of artificial intelligence, primitive state of artificial intelligence, and the advanced state of robotics. We understand that all the components that we talk about are already out there for you to digest. So you have to hone your question in more specifically. I see no lack of feasibility towards, say, Jacques Fresco's city systems. The aeroponics, hydroponics, belt, all of these things can be constructed. You put the infrastructure underneath the city, very similar to what we have now, self-contained with energy, windmills, solar panels. Those are all built into the city. The only attribute that requires a great deal of investigation really is the central complex which governs everything. And all that is a system of governance. We already have microcosms of governance systems used for energy grids, used for all sorts of industrial applications. It just needs to be scaled out to apply to the entire city system. So it monitors, it's the nervous system, it monitors everything. Yes, that doesn't exist yet, but it exists in microcosm. So my point is the technological components are very much there. And if you, instead of looking at the absolutes of these technological attributes, it's better to look at the trends, because then you can actually foreshadow where we're going to be in the future. With the exponential growth of information technology and technology in general, you can see that we're going to be very, very advanced technologically in many, many, many fields within the next decade or so, way beyond anything I think people can consider right now. We can't think exponentially. We can only think linearly. So you'd have to be more specific. I think Jacques and Roxana have put some tremendous stuff. I mean, there aren't detailed blueprints, but that's not even really required. If you needed a detailed blueprint for, say, the city system, I'm sure Jacques has one somewhere that discusses. In fact, I think some of their videos already discuss the underlying infrastructure. Those are just the specifics, and the specifics I think can be understood pretty easily once you get the general idea down. So I hope that answers your question. From Earth to Venus, the project that we're trying to do, which will evaluate the carrying capacity of the Earth and take into account as much as possible to begin building a virtual environment of a resource-based economy, is where a lot of these statistical elements will be entered and viewable. But once again, if you want to ask a more specific question about a specific attribute, please do so. The overarching generalization that it's not, quote, provable and to be technically feasible isn't real, because we have to take into account what's actually going on now. It's simply putting it all together with the correct systems infrastructure to create the symbiotic, to create the synergistic relationship between all of these currently detached fields with the social imperative of sustainability and peak efficiency. Project Earth, I think, did a good job of describing that. Project Earth was the second section of the Iowa lecture that I did. I briefly touched upon that in New York as well. It's not a good idea to get bogged down in specifics at this stage. You have to understand the overarching point. The specifics will come. There's nothing that I've heard of that, other than the complaints about human nature and everything else, how we wouldn't work in a system like this. There's nothing technically about what Jacques has described that really can't be done right now. If there was a, absolute motivation to do it. If there was, say, a Manhattan Project to redesign the world society, that's what we need. We need a crash project to get this done quickly. In a sane world, that's what would happen. We'd have every high technology scientist in every government working to establish this type of relationship, this type of city structure, this type of infrastructure required. The monitoring of the Earth's resources, again, microcosms of that have already happened. Hewlett-Packard is working to create ubiquitous sensing systems. It's already been foreshadowed because of the inverse relationship of cost to technological development through Moore's law that microchips will eventually be cheaper than paper. The resources that make microchips are really quite simple. You can make them out of sand, loosely speaking. So the idea of having this stuff really is already coming to fruition on its own accord, but it really would be wonderful to have, say, I don't know, a couple 100,000 scientists around the world mobilized to do this. If you thought about it that way, what we consider would be improbable, what might be considered improbable at this stage, such as the artificial intelligence, I think would skyrocket in its feasibility once the energy is really put forward in it with the social imperative applied. So I hope that helps. Now, where am I? Number 11. Hi, Peter. A simple question on ownership and property. To what extent and level do you see the removal of property and ownership in a resource-based economy? I know you've said that people could and would move around and live in different places, but also wouldn't some people want a stable place to stay over a long period of time, somewhere to call home? This draws into question the family unit and relationships. I know the origin of fixed income started at the beginning of the agricultural age after the hunter-gatherer age, where people were nomadic, he says. The second part of the question is there a point at which we can say that this is mine? This could relate to clothing, watches, shoes. Also, I'm a musician. One would want to own instruments in a resource-based economy. An instrument is a very personal thing. You have to get to know it, and specific sizes, shapes, and designs suit different people. Also, diversity in instrumentation can breed creativity. I've never really heard you address these questions of property and ownership. I hope this is not repetitious. Okay, so you've talked about some cultural attributes, some custom attributes that might clash with the way we describe how the future will unfold as far as the relationship of property, familiar relationships staying in one place. It's hard to predict what people will want to do in this environment. But let me put it this way in regards to the overarching point. When people go into a public park today, a public park where no one owns, and say there's a baseball team and they're playing baseball, and then there's another baseball team, and there's only one baseball diamond in the park today. You don't see the other baseball team, at least very rarely, unless you're in a very dominant environment, maybe a gangland environment, doesn't matter. But generally speaking, you don't see the one baseball team just basically wipe out the other team so they can take the diamond. There is a general respect when someone's sitting in one place, another person's sitting in another place, where the other person isn't just going to run up and push the other person out of the way just because it's a private park, therefore no one owns the park. I hope you see my point. It will be a form of respect that will be established that will basically say, well, this person's occupying this space. That's their ability to do so. And I have no problem with that because I have the freedom to move around, or I have the freedom to get whatever they have as well. So the familial attribute of what I'm trying to say about moving around, if someone wants to stay in one place, well, I don't see why that would be a problem. But I think there will be a cultural shift where even someone that has a family, they'll move with their family. It's not that they have to move a bunch of stuff either because they don't have to own a bunch of stuff. It just becomes a very different thing. But I want to, again, point out the overarching point where people say, well, if there's no laws and there's no property, then how do we protect each other from each other, which if someone wants to steal something, well, a respect would emerge based on a respect for people's access. And the fact that everyone would have access to the same things would enable a feedback loop where where basically there would be no need for people to behave in the aberrated ways we see them behave today. As far as your interest in having a musical instrument, I'm a musician, I have musical instruments. Some instruments are more personal than others. There's no reason why you can't have, say, a very sensitive violin that's been custom made for you in an automated factory that is, quote, yours. And why would someone want to steal that from you, of course, is the question that comes up over and over and over again. And if they did, well, that's unfortunate. Nothing's perfect. Odds are they wouldn't steal it from you because they would know that they can get it themselves. And then you could get it custom made yourself as well. Now, there's many things you could argue about nuances of woods and all of these things, but I think advanced automated production methods will be able to mimic just about everything that we see in the future, especially in the advent of nanotechnology. So let me go back to your overarching question here. Family unit relationships, I see that no hindrance with this. So these are cultural attributes. To have a family and stay in one place, I think is actually a very bad idea. I think it becomes stagnating. I think families would enjoy moving around, especially if they didn't have to carry a lot of stuff everywhere with them. And as far as saying what is mine, as you point out, what you have access to would be respected. And if it isn't respected, it would be very rare for that situation to occur because the other person can get what you have without a price tag. Is it an environment where there'd be no such thing as any form of scarcity? No. But just like today, there's still scarcity of even the ocean. There's still a limited amount of water that you're seeing in the oceans, recycling through the atmosphere. Is it scarce? Well, it's scarce in theory once you reach the point of using all of the water. People will understand the natural forms of scarcity that will exist because it already exists today and people already understand it today. Not everyone can run up to Jacques Fresco because he's only one person and ask him a question in the flesh. These are understood notions, and those understandings will carry forward into a new society. But I want to bring this point up again about the public park, because if anyone brings this up to you, I think that's a great analogy. We see people showing mutual respect for each other in environments where it's not about property or ownership all over the place. It's not extended to relate to the points that we're trying to talk about. People will have respect for access, in other words, because they know that they can get what they need as well. So there's no reason to hinder anybody else. In the event that there is a problem, they say there's a scarcity issue, which could happen, well, that would be overcome through technological means and hopefully foreshadowed long in advance if our systems are working properly. Number 12. Hello, Peter. I basically support the principles of the Zenus Project, specifically the educational imperatives of using information we have as a foundation in the scientific method, and to be honest, enough to tell ourselves when we don't know, which is exactly what I'm doing here. I don't know how a resource-based economy operates in detail, how it's designed and how it functions. As I see it, there are some major problems with a resource-based economy that haven't been addressed yet, so here it goes. We all know it is impossible to eliminate scarcity of all kinds of resources, and we also know that there is a human propensity to strive for rare resources. I think I answered this question at the end of a broadcast last week, but let me quickly point out and stop right there. You state that there is a human propensity to strive for rare resources. I have no idea what that means. Why would there be a human propensity to strive for rare resources unless there's a value to those resources that can be exchanged in for something that is meaningful to the individual in question? So if there's no monetary value, then why would someone care if they had a really nice diamond? What would be the utility of the diamond would be the actual important point. In that sense, rarity is an arbitrary value. You continue, secondly, we can't eliminate social stratification. We simply like some kinds of people less or more than others, and group formation and elitism is inevitable. Well, again, social stratification in an economic sense is very, very specific. It's also very much interrelated to the state of affairs we see today, which is artificial. Well, everything is real, but artificial in the sense that it's not necessarily some universal guiding attribute of human nature. All you have to do is go back to the early hunter-gatherer societies, or the ones that currently exist, such as the Pitaha in the Amazon, and see that there is no stratification. So you can't consider stratification in the sense of just eliminating it. It also works on multiple levels. You have, I think I gave the exact same analogy last week. If you have someone that works in the lower echelon of their corporate environment, they could simultaneously be at the highest echelon of their stratified sphere in another place, such as their football team or their bowling team. They could be the best bowler in their entire state, but yet they make the least amount of money in their corporation. So stratification is it's almost arbitrary, and it's culturally defined at this point beyond the economic issue. So, and again, we don't care to eliminate these fundamental things that are probably not a problem at all when it comes to people being better at a skill than someone else. Everyone, there isn't a person alive that probably isn't better at something than someone else. So it's a futile distinction. It's just the nature of our novelty and our educational process, our educational filtration that we've gone through as a human being growing. So I hope I answered your question. I think I already answered it last time anyway. Elitism is inevitable. Well, it depends on what you consider elitism. If someone is an expert in a field, given that they've done a tremendous amount of study and they've done a tremendous amount of contributions, it's not elitist for them to be considered more important in their expertise than someone else who has never studied the field. That's not really elitist. That's just pointing out where different human qualities have emerged that hopefully in the future society will begin to be collaborative. That was a nonsensical sentence. Let me state that again. We have to recognize that everyone has different propensities and everyone has different novelties, and their educational facilities are going to be novel too. Therefore, we have to realize that the importance of working together, because that's how we would learn and extend ourselves to each other and create better products and goods in a more sustainable society. That's a little bit of an aside. I'm going to leave it at that because I answered that question last week. Number 13. Hi, Peter. In your London lecture, Where Are We Now?, you state that the notion of property is a result of scarcity. I'm asking you to elaborate on this in more detail, considering the following. It's hard for me to understand. My understanding of scarcity may be the cause. Therefore, here what I think about it. Here's what I think about it. Scarcity is a situation where the most efficient use of all human and environmental resources is hardly sufficient to meet needs end. In my opinion, such a situation mandates collaboration and sharing. I can hardly see how this may lead to an invention of property. Furthermore, I think there are two other forms of scarcity which in my view cannot be taken to be real scarcity: perceived scarcity in comparison to others, which is derived from unequal access to resources, or enforced scarcity derived from misusing resources, destroying resources by war and other means, starving people to produce livestock or ethanol. Because these forms of scarcity can only be explained as a result of property, they can hardly serve as an explanation of it. I see what you're saying. That is a good point. My notion of scarcity and property is very simple. I think you're extending it very well. I can relate to what you're saying. Very simply, if you were living a long time ago and you had to spend a tremendous amount of time and energy to cut down trees to build yourself a table, and you had to do it from scratch, you would be very inclined to make sure no one could come around and take that table from you because of the tremendous amount of personal value you've invested into it. That's what I mean by property and scarcity. That's all. It's very, very simple. Throughout time, the notion of value, which we understand today, which is a combination of resources and human labor, creates a valuable item in the end because so much energy and labor and resources have gone into it, meaning that there is a high propensity for people to want to claim property for it because of all the labor. If they didn't have the legal protection of property, people could come along and take their work, which they've worked very hard for. In a new society that we talk about, we want to use our advanced methods of automation to eliminate the value mechanism as much as possible. So that's all I mean by scarcity. Property is an outgrowth of scarcity in that sense, but where you extend it in a way that also makes sense. It's just after the fact. So there's multiple definitions, if you will, multiple causalities. Number 14, I am aware that education is key to this new system, and it very much advocates the replacement of basic human labor with automation, but I am curious on technology's ability to affect human potential and thus evolution. A brief example, Daniel Paul Tammet holds the European record for memorizing and recounting pi to 22,000 digits in just 5 hours. He speaks a variety of languages, including Finnish, German, Spanish. I'm sure you're aware of the monks, particularly mind over physical matter aspect within the human makeup. My point being that given time, humans, like technology, are capable of a lot. Technology has the potential to free us to investigate this further, but also curb this potential if we become too reliant. What are your thoughts on this, and how can we avert it? I think the interaction with intelligent machines is going to be the paradigm of the future. Wolfram Alpha Nomis Alpha is a musical piece by Anna Xenakis. Wolfram Alpha and some other artificial intelligence feedback systems thinking programs are being slowly developed. They're still in their premature stages. But eventually Google will not be this childish search engine, this primitive search engine, where you type in something, it does a general search, very fundamental grammatical relationships, very fundamental of definitional relationships, and you get this huge list of returns. Eventually you will be just talking straight into your computer, or typing, talking, doesn't matter. You'll be communicating with your computer in a very specific way, and the computer will begin to understand questions. And you've already seen primitive attributes like this. So the point is that since the computer, again, the human mind is phenomenal, but we really can't compare to the specifics of what a computer can do in part in specific areas, such as basic computational ability. We haven't evolved with extremely sophisticated computational ability in our minds. We have savants, of course, which are exceptions, but a computer can do things so much more quickly than the human mind can. The only brilliance of the human mind at this stage is our pattern recognition. They've yet to be able to program a computer to maintain the consistency of pattern recognition. It's very interesting how we can do that. I think the highest form of artificial intelligence we have now in a holistic sense is maybe as intelligent, or maybe partially as intelligent as, say, a beetle, or a bee might be stretching it, in fact. Point being, I don't think there is a propensity at this stage to become too reliant on technology because there's a reinforcement mechanism to be lazy. I think in the future people will begin to have a great deal of respect with their machines, and they will learn from their machines. It will become an educational process to do a spell correction. When I do a spell correction on my computer, I look at the word. I just don't in a lazy fashion do a spell check and just blindly go through it. I actually want to learn. And this, I think, is the value system that will be created in the future, where people will be inclined to learn as opposed to fearing learning, which is unfortunately a propensity that exists now. So let me make sure I understood your question. I think I got everything on that one. Number 15. Hi, Peter. Do you envision any sort of competition in any form in a resource-based economy? For example, what about sporting competition? You mentioned playing against yourself in the form of a hologram, but I feel this would be a tough sell to many people, myself included. I personally don't see anything wrong with people competing with each other in friendly sporting matches such as hockey. Friendly competition where money isn't involved wouldn't bring about aberrant behavior. Do you agree? I think in certain instances you're absolutely right. There's plenty of, watching the Olympics is really a wonderful thing to see all the countries coming together. Simultaneously they're competing, but simultaneously they're coming together to share this collective group experience. The issue of competition, I know plenty of people that become very distorted by competitive means, and they hold grudges against others because of being outdone in competitive environments, whether it's educational testing or whether it's sports. It all depends on the background of the individual, in the end. I think, generally speaking, it goes both ways. I think it would be beneficial if people did break out of the competitive mechanism and instead competed with themselves for personal development. I would hope maybe eventually through time people become mature enough where they can compete against each other, but they do it as a form of exercise. It isn't about beating any one person. It's about sharing the experience and, again, personal development as opposed to claiming that you're better than someone else. That is really a maturity issue. We live in a very immature society, that immaturity, of course, is reinforced by the reward mechanisms and the value mechanisms of money and the idea that we're actually responsible for anything, which if you dig deep enough, you find that it's a serial process of interlinking assumptions and conclusions. There really is no conclusion, ever. So, I hope that helps. Number 16, hi Peter. Have you considered making your third film a bit shorter and perhaps more positive in general? While Addendum was well received at Z-Day in Denver, the most common critique I heard by audience members was that the film was too long and doom and gloom for the general public to get excited about. Also, will you go into more specific examples in your third film of current and future technology that can bring about a resource-based economy? This will be helpful for future presentations. Our chapter will conduct at local universities. Yes, first of all, to go in reverse, the new film is dedicated specifically to the, as much as I hate to say it, the academic community. I am specifically targeting those experts and professionals that work in the realm of robotics, artificial intelligence, human behavior, social issues, and basically trying to answer all the questions in one film that relate to what comprises the fundamentals of a resource-based economy. I think I mentioned that before. So I'm doing my best to do that. Hopefully I can actually find time to do it. At this stage, I don't know how the hell I'm going to possibly make it in the next 6 months, which is why, again, I'm going to start shifting things around and postponing these radio shows. Anyway, as far as the positive notion of addendum, I don't know what you mean. I mean, obviously the first section talks about problems, the first two sections. I thought the last two sections really did give a certain degree of hope. If you really think about it, it's telling people that we can produce enough for everyone. We can relieve ourselves of mundane labor. I see addendum as leaving on a very positive note. It's not naive saying that this is some magical thing that can happen overnight. There are plenty of things that I didn't bring up that were probably negative, but I wanted to keep it on a positive note to show that there is a potential. There are many hurdles, of course, which I will go into more specifically in the new film. I will say the new film is going to talk about the necessity to move into it as opposed to just some fanciful whim to provide everyone with the necessities of life. I've reached the point where I've understood that either we move into a new structure very deliberately, or we're going to have tremendous ecological and, of course, economic problems continually. This is an unfortunate thing. I'm going to be very careful how I tread on the subject because, again, I don't want to come off as a doomsday theorist, but if you take a look around what's happening, nothing can get better anytime soon with the current state of the economic structure and what it's manifesting. I won't belabor it. As far as making a shorter version, it's more positive. You know, I can only do what I think is actually applicable. I can't just make something positive to placate people. I need to be honest and have that integrity. I mean, some people might disagree with me, but as long as I know that I'm honest with myself, at least at that stage I can live with myself. And I try very much not to kowtow to people and to make strategic notions, not to be, what's the word I'm looking for? I try not to bullshit people, basically. And I think it's a difficult line to walk. You want to be strategic in your communication to get the most people interested, but simultaneously you don't want to be dishonest and mislead people. So I'm going to leave it at that because I'm just going to start running out of time. Number 17, why aren't people more concerned their money is losing its purchasing power? Nobody seems overly worried when prices go up and up and up over time. Hey, good question. That's the psychosis of the system. Everyone seems to think inflation is a natural product, which it is. And they don't seem to understand how dangerous it is to have an infinite growth attribute like that continues to move. I don't understand how people can deny the inflationary issue. All you have to do is look at what goods and services cost, 100 years ago to see how insane things have become. And yes, we're on pace to hyperinflation as of now. Anyway, there's inflation. The inflationary thing is difficult to assess because there's a tremendous latency. There's a huge lag when it comes to inflation. So a bunch of money is put into the system, as has been. It has an effect. The economy starts to stir, and then it's only when it's fully digested the inflationary attributes come to fruition. But yeah, I share your concern. I don't understand why more people out there aren't concerned about economic issues because they're so bogged down in their own personal issues. That's why most people aren't concerned with social issues in general. That's why most people they don't even think about the Iraq War or the Afghanistan War anymore because they're struggling so much with the economic decline. In fact, the greatest thing for the military-industrial complex is to make sure that society is in disarray. Because as long as people are distracted by having their own financial circumstance to worry about, they're much less likely to interfere in what the establishment orthodoxy is doing to steal the rest of the resources on the planet. Number 18. When hearing you speak about a resource-based economy, I've noticed that you use the term systems-based approach on a number of occasions. I was wondering what exactly a systems-based approach is simply. Again, I apologize if my question seems obvious. No, just type in systems theory into Google and you will get a basic definition of the synergistic relationship of a systems approach to anything. Basically, it's treating any seemingly broken set of attributes as one single whole synergistically. I use this the planet is a holistic system. The planet is a biosphere that is feeding back constantly within itself. There's no separation between land and water, atmosphere, anything in regards to that. It's a single system. That's why the disruption of the rainforest is so problematic. That's why all these ecological things are concerning so many different people, because corporations don't understand that there's a synergistic relationship to just about everything. I mean, the only reason that the human species is even here is because of the synergistic relationship that has materialized. So once you recognize that, you realize that the only logical approach to governing our existence on this planet is through the same type of approach that the Earth mirrors, the Earth represents. So a systems-based approach to the planet is very simple. You start off with the assessment of all the Earth's resources as best you can, and then you create a holistic global system of resource management and surveillance of that system, monitoring of the system, and you extrapolate out of that system production distribution attributes of the most efficient, peak efficiency, point A to point B. I'm not even going to go into all the attributes because I don't want to waste time. I know I've talked about it before. But a systems approach is very simple. Jacques talked about it numerous times. I think it's in his book. I think it's in our general materials. And if you want to get more details on that, I think the Iowa lecture I did talked about a systems theory approach in more detail and a ground-up approach to management of all earthly resources and production distribution. Number 18, many members have attempted to show public screenings of Zeitgeist Addendum, but can't because they need to provide documentation to prove that we are a non-profit organization. I understand that we're still not registered as such, which makes it more difficult. Why? Okay. Well, first of all, you don't have to. People don't seem to read my websites or anything. Addendum can be shown at any network. There's a downloadable form that's on the Z-Day 2010 page. In fact, I'm going to put that on the toolkit page in general, even though I'm trying to disband the association of the films overall and focus on our materials. Because we've gotten a lot of new materials coming forward, I'm trying to keep it focused on the actual movement materials and not as much my films, because the films have creative attributes which can be interpreted incorrectly and read into incorrectly and then transferred into the movement arbitrarily, and then confusion is created. So, point being is that, first of all, like Zeitgeist Addendum, you can show it. There's a form you can download. Anyone can show it. I don't charge any network for showing it. In fact, I really don't even care. As long as no one's selling it outright, even if you had an event you have yourself in a theater and you charge for it to cover your bases, I really don't care, as long as it's not being exploited. It's just show it. And as far as a nonprofit, nonprofits are, first of all, very difficult, and they take a year to obtain. And I just don't see the need to have that right now. I just don't see the need to have that legal issue set up. Maybe when in the event we have a project that emerges where we have to take donations, that can be organized. And it's in the back of my mind. A nonprofit organization is there. I'm just so anti-establishment at this point. I'm not interested in the general routes. I'm not interested in the path that's been created through general activism. What is the general course of activism? Okay, you start a nonprofit, and then you go through this predefined route that the system allows you to deal with. I want to step over the entire system. It's time to break away from the traditional routes, because if you follow those routes, just like all the other main activist organizations, large activist organizations, you end up probably in the same circle that doesn't go anywhere. As I've stated before, there's not one activist organization, and this is an aside, that really engages the fundamental problem, which is the market system. Until you show me Greenpeace talking about the problems of the market system itself, meaning the actual market system, not just some legislation, until you show me any organization out there that is really willing to face the fact that the system itself is causing the problems and that the only resolution is the removal of the system, I have a hard time dealing with those organizations. But I don't dismiss them either. They serve a role. But I'd love to talk to heads of these organizations, and in fact I do attempt to. I've sent out many emails. And everyone's terrified of that notion. They're not willing to make that distinction. Because a nonprofit organization is a profit organization, first of all. I hope everyone understands that. All the nonprofit attribute means is that they get a certain lenience to how they can organize themselves. You can still pay yourself $100,000 a year and run a nonprofit organization. And that becomes problematic because it becomes an establishment. Anyway, I'm not going to belabor all that. 20 minutes left. Number 19, do you think that perhaps the desire to progress is the slightly prettier sister of the desire to hoard, consume, and be affluent? I see the only way out of likening the two tendencies is to depart from the notion that there is no human nature, our desire to want material goods is certainly a product of the system, perhaps preying on our primitive instincts to accumulate resources. But are our desires to progress and acquire knowledge too products of social conditioning, in your opinion? Or is it, do you think, the accidental purpose imprinted on us by the primitive disposition of us big-brained primates to learn? I ask this question because at present the only fully sustainable people on this planet are those who have not progressed and are still living life in the Stone Age. It seems to me that if progression is measured by sustainability, then the direction we need to be moving is backwards. Of course, this isn't what we modern folk want. Well, you bring up many, many points to address in this question. Let me figure out where to start. Okay, the first question regarding the comparison for progress versus the comparison to hoard, consume, and be affluent. I think as I started the program with Michael Douglas, if you remember from Wall Street, he does this speech which holds a certain degree of viability, but he takes it too far, and of course it's just a movie. It's supposed to be this way, but it's called the Greed is Good speech. And he attributes greed not only to greed for property and money, but greed for knowledge, greed for progress. I think it's an interesting association. I think there's a general interest to want more information, but I think you have to collar materially the interest to want more and more goods. One, I think, serves a function and another doesn't. So the question is educational. I mean, you can make generalizations in regards to the interest of wanting more and more and desire, but you have to ask yourself what the utility purpose is. And then, due to our malleability as a human being, which I'm in full support of, I think we're extremely malleable, then it becomes, where do you focus the student? Where do you focus the individual? You want to focus them on the utility. You want them to understand that knowledge is important because knowledge relates to things that can create something else, etc., as opposed to materialism and hoarding, which is more of a primitive distinction which can't be justified in most cases. So, the desire to want material goods is definitely a part of the system, as you point out, but I think the desire to acquire knowledge comes from somewhere else. I think it might be reinforced by the system. Honestly, this system doesn't reinforce that. In fact, it reinforces laziness as far as I'm concerned. But if you look at a child, you'll notice that a child has a general curiosity. I hate to use the term hardwired, but what else would you expect from a new organism? It sees things it has never seen before. It moves around. It has no idea what fire is. If you don't protect the child will stick its hand right in the fire because it doesn't know any better. It's curious. I think that curiosity is what is robbed from most people as they grow up and they're thrown into the slots of specialization. So I think it's a combination, in other words. And as far as the notion of sustainable people being primitive people, it's interesting that works out. I think I've stated in the past that what we seek in the future is a technologically advanced form of minimalism. So with the city systems, you don't have the problem of globalization anymore, of importing strawberries from Ecuador, bananas from Chile. You build them into the city system. You have localization. Localization is an important part of most communities, indigenous communities, granted, because they create things themselves. They don't necessarily import things or trade things with other tribes. But they are more sustainable because they're restricted by the environment. As the hunter and gatherer societies were denoted, they hadn't processed agriculture yet, so they couldn't control their environment. Therefore, they were naturally in a self-contained position. With greater control comes greater responsibility, and that's where we're at now. I think we're just finally growing up to learn that we have to have a tremendous amount of foresight and responsibility with the way we manipulate society. So I'll leave it at that. I think I see your point, but there's far too many people on this planet at this stage to think that we can go back into a agrarian society. We need high technology, and I think once we begin to learn and understand what these new advents really mean, what their utility is, how to focus them correctly, how to thwart the war tendency to use new technology, etc. People will learn how to be utterly sustainable and a very high quality of life in the modern world with all the fruits of modern society you see today. It's simply a matter of refocusing and educating people on what is required, which I think is basically self-evident, but nothing, again, in our current model is reinforcing those attributes. Second part of this question, or it might be a second, actually no, it's a new question. Number 20, if by the time we reach the Venus Project, the world population is greater than the carrying capacity of the Earth and the remaining resources are being expelled at an exponential rate, then what happens to that excess of people? How do we decide who is to be left and who is to die? Who will foresee collapse of the current system? Or will the foreseen collapse of our current system prevent this from ever happening? Perhaps this will be the collapse itself. If things aren't changed radically and quickly, you're going to see probably a peak of population growth because there won't be enough money or enough energy don't be enough money to create the infrastructure for new energy that's required. You won't have the food production capabilities. You're going to start running out of water. We're on pace to continually running out of water. And that's a very, very serious problem. And if there's no money to create the desalination required to help with the agricultural methods, obviously at that stage aeroponics and hydroponics are out of the question because that's going to take a, quote, investment. So the problem is in the system that we're in now that the carrying capacity of the Earth isn't even a relevance to it, but I'll go into that in a second. I just want to point out that you will see a decline in human population if things aren't radically changed from what we're seeing now. And that has, again, nothing to do with some idiotic conspiracy notion, some Alex Jonesian nonsense. This is about a system that is failing, that was inherently void to begin with, and it's simply taken this long for the path to come to fruition as far as the inevitability of it, with the exponential growth in human population due entirely, almost entirely, to the advent of oil. Technology, of course, has helped, but the technology is nothing without energy, as I'm sure everyone knows. So, going back to your point, what would happen to an excess of people if the carrying capacity of the Earth was exceeded? Well, after we move into the oceans, if it became a problem even at that stage, after we move aerially, after we build mile-high skyscrapers, first of all, I hope education prevails and people slow down their rutting a little bit. But basically, we would get off the planet at that stage. You would terraform another planet. It is a very large universe out there, and there's no reason with modern technology that we couldn't begin to colonize other planets. I throw that out there, obviously, to just make the point that we are in a closed system, but it doesn't mean exploration in space is out of the question. I don't think we're going to achieve the carrying capacity of the Earth anytime soon. I think natural barriers are going to emerge which will slow population growth, such as this energy crisis that's looming. But once we finally assess the carrying capacity of the Earth, which of course is coupled in with technology, then we'll actually have a basis to understand what we can do, and the whole world will be made aware of where we are and what we can do. So I hope that makes sense. Yeah, I think I've answered that question. It's a complex question because it's very sensitive naturally. No one wants to think of a time where such a thing as not having enough resources to support the people would actually occur. And I hope to never see that time. And if we're proactive as a species, that time will never come. It's simply a matter of education and using our technological ability to extend into the oceans and to realize how many other ways we can support people on this planet. And worst case scenario, we move off the planet. Number 21. Hello, Peter. I think the biggest obstacle to a resource-based economy is the concept of property. If people realize that property is nothing more than an unnecessary vicious circle of mistrust and restriction, they will see that their interests are actually parallel, and something like the resource-based economy will manifest itself eventually. Also, how would you explain to someone in what way is resource-based economy different than what Karl Marx called pure communism? Let me rephrase that question. In what way would you say to someone how a resource-based economy is different? Very simply with the final point, communism never ever addressed resources in any real way. They never took into account the carrying capacity of the Earth. They never had a resource approach to the organization of society. Communism was explicitly based on a social concept, which was to equalize things, to give the workers the rights that they deserve, the workers that were so exploited by the capitalist system. It's an old idea, and it's social. It's not environmental. We are a sustainability movement, if you will. And all the attributes that will describe the way society should be will be built upon the natural resources and the laws of nature as we know them. In fact, it's not even of any form of opinion. It's not even it doesn't even matter what any of us think about what the future should be. It's what the physical referents dictate. And it's our job as a human being, a conscious organism, to adjust to what nature requires for us to be sustainable. That's what we mean by eliminating opinion. Where am I? Number 22. Peter, did you write the goal and the truth in the transition paragraphs on the homepage? If so, I think you should consider seriously writing a book. The information presented in this way seems to be very powerful as well. Well, thanks. I did write that very, very quickly. I'm actually going to go in and change a lot of that stuff. I'm going to keep the articles, and I'm going to put more information, more direct information about the movement, a little less general. I think, even though those essays I think are okay, sometimes they're a bit general, and maybe put something about what the movement is in a very simplified paragraph form. Obviously, the about does that too, but I've been meaning to to add in more content with that, and hopefully have just more essays in general. In fact, it'd be kind of fun to have other people write some essays, and the Media Project will do this, actually. We'll have a whole section, and maybe that will carry over into our dominant essays and points that we have on the main movement site. But thank you. Number 24. Peter, I would like to start writing letters to the editor of my local newspaper in hopes of spreading awareness. I believe I have a full understanding of the movement and the Venus Project. However, I'm sure I'm not perfect. Is it okay to write these editorials using the Zeitgeist Movement name, or should I not speak directly for the movement? Well, I obviously can't proof everything everyone does. If you feel confident and you're in support of what we're doing, then I think you should do whatever you can. I think writing anything is a good idea, and presenting it to your local newspaper obviously is a great idea. This is what I hope all chapters are doing. I hope that all chapters out there are putting a continual pressure on their local media, not only for Zeitgeist Day, but just in general. We need a larger PR campaign. I'm going to talk about this more so. The presence for the last Zeitgeist Day was actually pretty good. I didn't expect much from the States, and not that much really came about it, but there were some good European articles, some of which are posted on the main site and news. And again, next year I think we're going to do this in Europe. But yes, so please do whatever you can. Number 25, getting to run out of time here. The following is not a question, but more of an inspiration to those of us who get overwhelmed by naysayers. People ask me why I'm involved in the Zeitgeist Movement. I tell them that they tell me that I will never live to see the kind of civilization proposed by the movement. I tell them this: every great cause has its beginning, every great invention has its end. If we're not for the people at the beginning, nothing would ever start. If it were not for the people at the beginning, nothing would ever start. I'm a mother and a grandmother. I do this for them. I may never see a Zeitgeist world, but I will be a part of the beginning. Well, as I mentioned before, it's like building a medieval cathedral. Just because the people that had to spend, generations that would build these cathedrals, just because the first generation never saw its completion, doesn't mean there isn't a great deal of change and satisfaction that emerges as they slowly see it be constructed. And again, there's no end. There's no end. There could be all sorts of transitional attributes that could mirror what a resource-based economy is. There could be halfway points, which could be good accents, which people could be satisfied by. So I think it's better to consider it as an ongoing path and not get obsessed with this idea that one day in your life you're going to be able to just walk into a resource-based economy or one of Jacques' city systems and everything's going to be great. Obviously, that's a long ways away. So that's what I say to people that get a little too gung-ho. I see a few different types of mentalities out there. There's always the one, and Jacques comments on this, where he says, yeah, there's always that group of people that say, well, when you build it, we'll come. But they don't want to participate in any of the legwork to make this thing happen. And on another side, there's people that are so selfish that all they want to do is go out and build some commune and get away and escape from things, and they want to do it for their own self-interest, blatant self-interest, and that's equally as insulting and annoying. The only angle that you can have with this is to do it because you believe in it, and to do it because whether it happens for your life or your grandchildren's life or your great-grandchildren's lives, it really doesn't matter. You're doing something, and it's rewarding to just simply be involved in the act. That is the way I think about it. I have a very relaxed disposition on all of this, as I mentioned before. I don't get fanatic about it. I don't get obsessed about it. I do it because I do it in a very paced way because that's how you maintain your sanity, for one, considering how aberrated things are out there. And I recommend everyone out there, you don't have to spend 12 hours a day doing work for the movement to help get the information out there. Even if you only have a few hours a week to do something, to send some emails out, to if you go to somewhere and you meet a political official, talk to anyone about these ideas. And that's really how this thing is going to transfer and continue to spread. It's really word of mouth that's going to let this thing, that's going to allow this to materialize. Anyway, I'm running out of time. I don't want to belabor that issue. I think I've talked about all of that before. Number 26, I suggest a semantic construal such as estimated carrying potential as a challenge to your idea of finite resources and carrying capacity. I believe the idea of spaceship Earth, where resources are finite, is incorrect. What about renewable resources? One seed, if nurtured, could be planted everywhere given its amazing generative abilities. Therefore, we cannot precisely count renewable resources since they are constantly changing in quality. Well, in the words of Buckminster Fuller, we live in a regenerative universe. Finite resources is a loose distinction. We could say that solar energy is renewable energy, but it's only because the time frame is so large. Obviously, the sun will eventually burn out. We live in a world where our lifespans are very, very short, and it takes billions of years for simple minerals to be culminated. Oil takes hundreds of millions of years. The reason we consider it a closed, finite system is simply because what we're doing in the establishment today is utterly unsustainable because there's not enough time to allow the regeneration of the established attributes that we're currently using for energy and other mechanisms. So you're right. Yeah, I think, but hopefully you understand our context. You can't, if you were to wipe out all the trees on the planet, given our demand for lumber, you couldn't plant them fast enough to have them grow fast enough to meet the demand if there was a wipeout. So hopefully you get the point. It's temporal. But I would still say we live in a finite planet at this stage. It's a closed system for the most part. As far as our context within planetary operations, it's a closed system. Number 27, you once said that you used to have some metaphysical ideas. What did you mean by this? What changed? Jacques seems to be against metaphysics, and he couples it in with religion. But at the moment, I think it is too much of a blanket statement. Could you give a response in this area? If not this week, can this question be addressed eventually? Sure. Well, definition of metaphysics, I used a different definition of metaphysics. I used a very clinical definition, meaning beyond the physical. I'm not talking about early metaphysical notions that are denoted in philosophy, such as Plato, I believe, Plato. Beyond the physical, when you say something's beyond the physical, or you can't find a connection that's physical, first of all, that's impossible. I don't understand how anything could be beyond the physical. And I think that's really the general argument. So people that talk about telekinesis that can show no physical connection, there are people that engage in all sorts of interesting things that they claim work, but there's no way to find the source. And there's probably developmental examples of science where this has occurred, and eventually we did find the source, which is great. So I would simply say that there's a lot of spooky metaphysical notions out there that you could basically infer that there's really nothing to them. And until there's a line drawn between point A and point B, which allows us to understand why a particular nuance might be what it is, then there's no reason to support it, unless it has an immediate reaction and it serves a functional utility. So I'm running out of time now. I only have 1 minute left. Let me just quickly go fast through this. I won't use an end music for this. 28, will clothing be custom made in the future? Will it be manufactured only when ordered? I think in the future all clothing will be custom and they will be printed at home through 3D printing. Number 29, I have 60 seconds. Peter, if someone handed you $10 million right now, what would you do with it? How would it affect you? How would it affect you personally? $10 million would be put into the coffers of the Zeitgeist movement. That would be an amount of money that would be substantial enough to actually put towards a project, and would be influential enough to inspire other people to donate money. With that type of beginning point, then there would be a means to move forward with, say, an experimental city system. Number 30, hi Peter, I'm from Utah, where most of, you know what, I'm running out of time. I have probably 20 seconds left, so I'm going to stop right now. Thank you all very much for listening, and I will be back relatively soon. I'll keep you guys posted, but there's not going to be a show next week. There'll be a few weeks where there's no shows because I just have to get my bearings together and participate more in these meetings that are coming up. Take a great time for those who have attended. And again, there's one at 6, and hopefully those in the international community can come. And I thank you all, and I'll talk to you all very soon. Goodbye.